Hi guys, this is Shelte, and in this video series I will try to go over each class on Turtle WoW, covering all their changes, their new abilities, and how these might affect their capabilities in both leveling, PvE and PvP, as well as how they might create new opportunities for new builds and playstyles. And in today's video, we'll be taking a closer look at the Mage here on Turtle WoW. Here on Turtle WoW, and let's read the words of the developers. Mage is luckily one of those classes that does not struggle with viability, being a class that's always been stable for leveling and amongst groups for all types of content. Fire and Frost both have their spots and deal good damage, but their rotations are infamously bland compared to other classes. Meanwhile, Arcane has a lot of issues with its viability and identity, being a specialization locked to one single target and one area of effectability. For this reason, we've added a few things for Fire and Frost to add another layer to their rotations and have done a major rework of Arcane, making it a specialization fitting the nature of Arcane as a spell school that's wild and uncontrollable. Okay, that's very interesting. I know that for the first batch of changes, they already did something with the Mage. They brought in some changes to Arcane, improvements to Arcane Explosion. They had their capstone at the end of the tree, which I think was Brilliance Aura, and some Arcane Potency, basically giving crits from Arcane spells more damage, more bonus damage. But now it seems that they've done a lot more, and we'll jump back and forth between the talent trees and the changes they've made. So baseline changes: a new spell, Arcane Surge, blast your target with overloaded mana, dealing X to Y arcane damage, only usable after one of your spells are fully or partially resisted. This spell cannot be fully or partially resisted. Flat mana cost, meaning it costs a specific amount of mana no matter your level, it seems. 8-second cooldown, instant cast, and scales 65% with your spell power. This ability is learned at level 32, with new ranks at level 40, 48, and 56. Rank 1 does so much damage and costs 85 mana, and here you see the ranks. It's gotta be kind of a niche spell, since in order to use this you have to resist or partially resist. A spell has to be resisted or partially resisted. So yeah, that is it's quite interesting. And then the next one here we have Arcane Missiles. Spell power scaling coefficient per missile for ranks above level 20 increased from 28% to 32%. So a little bit more spell power scaling for Arcane Missiles, which is, I don't know, probably needed. Developer comment: this coefficient was initially 20% in vanilla and was raised to 28% in our first batch of class changes, which still felt short on competing with the scaling values of Frostbolt and Firebolt when their cast times were reduced by their respective improved talents. This change might seem quite minor at a glance, but equals to 21% increase in spell power scaling for one complete channel of Arcane Missiles, and this scaling increase also scales multiplicatively with Arcane's rupture damage and mana cost increase effect. I don't know what this is, Arcane's rupture damage and mana cost increase effect, but we'll probably see from either abilities or talent trees later on. With this increase, Arcane Missiles should be equal to the scaling values of the aforementioned spells, even when they're talented to cast faster. Okay, then we have Dampen and Amplify Magic. Now only have one rank, costs 6% of your base mana, and now grant the following: Dampen Magic, 2% reduced magic damage taken and 1% reduced healing taken. Amplify Magic gives you a 2% increased healing taken and 1% magic damage increase taken. So this just simplifies Dampen and Amplify Magic a lot. I think those were a little bit special abilities, and I'm quite sure there wasn't really that used. Just like the Hunter has a lot of spells that is just sitting there collecting dust. These are examples of the same, and I like them looking at what's not working in vanilla and then just polishing that a little bit, making those things a little bit more valuable. I wish they did the same for many of the Hunter spells. I know they did it, of course, for Mongoose Bite, and I can't stop rambling every time I compare things to my favorite class. So This is just how I do it. If you go like, oh no, he's talking about the goddamn hunter again now. That is just my class, and I can't but compare changes to what they've done with the class that I know the most about. And I think a lot of people who don't play hunter don't really realize how many abilities that are just sitting there collecting dust for a hunter. But moving on, the mana cost of Arcane Intellect has been reduced to the following. Rank 1 is a 10% or a 10 mana reduction, and then a 85 mana reduction, and half mana, and a third, and a third mana. Okay, so that's a lot of, that's basically the same as they did with the Priest. Reduced the mana cost of abilities that are buffing the entire group, so you can get on with the raid instead of having to sit there and drink every time you put a buff on somebody, which I like. It makes sense that it shouldn't be too cumbersome to buff your party. They did the same here with Arcane Brilliance, so reduce the mana cost a lot. And now we go into the specific traits. Arcane first, and this is also probably the most interesting because it seems from what we've read that this is the one they've completely reworked. So it's gonna be very interesting to see. I do recognize some of the icons, not that I know the mage, but I have looked at the talent trees before and I see some things that I recognize, but there are also some new things. So let's dive in. Arcane has been a specialization that has been left in the dark, both damage and flavor-wise, only serving to be the specialization for utility spells such as conjuring, teleportation, and portals, with a side of actual damaging abilities. We plan to fix this with our rework and give Arcane a proper rotation and flavorful talents and abilities. And when you think about it, mages are the epitome of Arcane, right? That is the purest, lore-wise, it is the purest form of magic. That is Arcane. That is what the Titans use. That is Order. That is basically what should have been the most polished spec for our dear mages, but it ended up being Fire and Frost that were the most used specs. So a much needed look into the Arcane tree, in my opinion. And to begin with, we have wand specialization. Now also increase your hit chance with wands by 10% and give your wand a chance on hit to grant you an amount of mana equal to 100% on 150% of your level. This chance is increased with every point. So that is this one. No, that is not this one. There it is. It's down here. That is this one. Increase the damage and chance to hit with wands by 13%. And okay, that's the damage, and then the hit percentage is 10%. That's basically the same as Priest, isn't it? I'm pretty sure the same as the Priest. Yeah, on the talent tree with the Priest, it doesn't say how much mana you restore, but on the talent here, it says restores 90 mana. But don't they say that the mana you restore is based on your level, right? Yeah, so that's probably just, it's gonna be probably the same for both of these, but just for some reason it's on the talent here, but it doesn't really make sense because, well, then that's when, if you're level 60, then that's 90 mana. So maybe that's fixed in-game, I don't know, probably is. Then it's gonna represent the correct amount of mana, depending on what your level is. Anyway, moving on. Magic Absorption now requires 3 points instead of 5. Mana Return reduced from 5% of your total mana to 3% of your total mana. Cooldown increased from 1 second to 2 seconds, but now triggers when one of your spells is partially or fully resisted instead of fully resisting a spell cast on you. And that makes a lot more sense that you would get mana back if the enemy resists one of your spells instead of you resisting one of the enemy's spells. Because if you cast a spell and it resists, you would want to get some of your resource back. So that's this one. Increase all resistance by 10%, and whenever, by 10, sorry, not percent, by 10, and whenever one of your spells is partially or fully resisted, restore 3% of your maximum mana. This effect cannot occur only once every 2 seconds. Arcane Concentration now has an 8-second cooldown. What is this one? Arcane Concentration, chance of entering a clear casting state after any damaging spell hits a target. Clear casting state reduces the mana cost of your next damage spell by 100%. This effect can only occur once every 8 seconds. Maybe because, I don't know if arcane missiles, each separate missile would be able to proc this, then maybe that's why they felt like they needed to put a internal cooldown on this one. But apparently it was probably proccing a lot because that's a long cooldown, so then maybe you could invest less points into this one and still get the same benefit. Who knows? Arcane Impact affects all arcane spells. Arcane impact. That is this one, increase the critical strike chance of your arcane spells. And I think before this would only apply to your arcane explosion. Am I right? Yeah, increase the critical strike chance of your arcane explosion. So now it's all arcane spells. And magic attunement requires 1 point instead of 2 points. And it increases, effect increase is increased from 25 to 50 to 100%. And now allows you to cast amplify magic and dampen magic on targets below level 63. Developer comment these abilities have been reworked. Refer to baseline changes section for details. That's this one. Magic attunement increased the effect of your amplify and dampen magic spells by 100% and allows them to be cast on enemies. And the level 62, it says here, I think it says level 63 in here, is just to allow it to be cast on bosses. I think that's the reason why. So another debuff for bosses. And what is it that it does? Amplify magic increases magic damage taken, and when you buff this with this new talent, it's increased by 2%. So it's not much, but since there is no debuff cap, I think, anymore on here on Turtle WoW on bosses, then might as well use this one. And then we have a new talent, Arcane Rupture, 3rd row Keystone. Rupture your target with concentrated arcane force, dealing X to Y arcane damage, and increasing the damage and mana cost of your arcane missiles by 25% for 8 seconds. This also has a flat mana cost, 2.5 second cast, 15 second cooldown, and 100% spell power scaling coefficient. So you would basically start with something like this, and then for 8 seconds you're buffing your arcane missiles. And that is this one. And on the talent tree it says 6 seconds, so maybe it's nerfed a little bit. And it also seems like the damage values are a little bit different. This is 121 to 166, and in here it's 111 to 125, so that's been buffed a little bit, maybe. I don't have a mage in game, so I can't actually test this and check the values, but someone will probably tell me in the comments which of these are the correct values. Improved mana shield, decrease the mana lost per point of damage taken when mana shield is active by 13, then 25% instead of 20%. So a little buff to mana shield. And then we have a new talent, Temporal Convergence. 4th row, 3 points. Your arcane missiles have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown for Arcane Rupture spell and cause it to refund its base mana cost on its next cast. This effect can only occur once every 15 seconds. Developer comment, the buff that refunds the mana cost on your next cast lasts 12 seconds. So there's some back and forth with Arcane Rupture and Arcane Missiles. I'm still a little bit interested. Is this every separate cast of Arcane Missiles, or is it just one complete channel of Arcane Missiles? Because it's incredibly strong if you consider that it's each time one missile hits, there is a chance for this to proc. But it's a completely different story if it's the entire channel they're talking about. But anyway, already this makes for a rotation and probably brings some interest to the Arcane specialization. Then we have Arcane Meditation, mana regeneration while casting increased from 15 to 20%. Additionally, this effect is now tripled while below 35% total mana, meaning you're getting 60% mana regeneration while casting if you are below 35% mana. So they're really pumping Mage sustain. I think other classes is going to be very envious of this, because that seems really strong. A lot of extra sustainability for a Mage with this talent. And let's go over this one. Was the Temporal Convergence we talked about before. And Arcane Meditation, this one, 20% of your mana regeneration while casting, and it's tripled if you are under 35% total mana. On this one, the improved mana shield also seen a 5% buff. Arcane Instability moved from the 6th row to the 5th row and now does the following. Your successful damaging arcane spells have a 25% chance to uncontrollably erupt, consuming 2% of your base mana to deal 25% more damage. That's this one. Arcane Instability, 25% chance to uncontrollably erupt, consuming 2% of your mana and deal 25% more damage. That's quite strong. So all of a sudden in PvP you're gonna get hell of a Arcane Rupture or Arcane Missile. This one's gotta be fun to play around with, I think. Another new talent, Accelerated Arcana. 5th row Keystone, increase the casting speed of your arcane spells by 6%. In addition, casting speed increase effect, increase the cooldown recovery speed of your arcane spells, and the tick speed of your arcane missiles, reducing their duration. Oh, okay, I see where they're going with this. So this is where it reduces the duration. It actually just reduces the channeling time and also speeds up the cooldown of your arcane spells. So it actually does a lot of things, this one. Developer comment: arcane abilities include Presence of Mind, Evocation, Arcane Power, Arcane Surge, and Arcane Rupture. What about Arcane Missiles? Well, it says Arcane Missiles right here, but for some reason it doesn't. These are probably, they wanted to include this on top of the Arcane Missiles just to make sure that people understand what other spells are affected by this talent, I think. But that's this one, just one talent point, and you're getting a lot of value from that one talent point. It is only 6%, so I don't know if it's that impactful, but for 1 point, might as well get it. And it seems like Presence of Mind is the same as it's always been. And then the next one is Arcane Potency, is the 6th row. Move from the 6th row to the 5th row. Now requires 2 points instead of 3 points, and increase your critical strike damage bonus by 100% instead of 50%. And it seems like it's a spell from, or a talent from the old wave of changes made to Arcane that has now been buffed even more. So, because I can't see it in here, Arcane Potency. Yeah, nah, so Arcane is getting a lot of extra damage on critical strikes. And this is without any need for it to ramp up. Or unlike how they butchered Elemental Shaman, sadly. But that's wrong. That's very nice to see. New talent, Resonance Cascade. 6th row, 5 points. Your successful damaging arcane spells have a 20% chance to duplicate for 50% of the damage. This effect can trigger off of itself, and duplicated arcane missiles are channeled in tandem with the original cast, meaning that, so basically this is actually them giving arcane mages the TBC version of Elemental Overload for shamans. Developer comment: self-trigger has a hard limit of 4 duplications, as the damage after that is too insignificant to calculate. Okay, so with this one, they're talking about since that it can trigger off of itself, but every time it does so, it reduces the damage it does by 50%. So the 4th time it does this, the damage is so insignificant that they simply just limit it to 4 duplications. Only one target is subject to duplication for Arcane Explosion. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because else that would be the most craziest AoE farming ability ever with this. Because imagine you just every creature hit by Arcane Explosion would trigger another Arcane Explosion. That would be insanely strong. So that's of course needed. Meaning no matter how many targets you hit, the original and duplicating explosion only roll their trigger chance once. Additionally, these additional casts do not trigger on-hit spell effects. And that also makes a little bit of sense, because if you had on-hit effects, for instance, a trinket that has a chance to do something whenever you hit a target with a spell, then that would actually be almost running constantly with all the spells firing off with something like this. But this is going to be a very RNG and very interesting and funny, I think, specialization now, the Arcane specialization. So that's very interesting with this one. Let's read the next here. Arcane Power completely revamped now does the following. When activated, your casting speed is increased by 35% while draining 2% of your maximum mana every second and reducing all mana gain by 75%. Falling below 10% maximum mana cause you to violently combust from uncontrollable power, killing you instantly. It lasts 20 seconds and cannot be cancelled. So basically, you really need to think about when you use this. If you have something on you that's going to mana drain you and you activate this, you're very likely going to kill yourself. So be wary of Viper Stings and priests that can mana drain you. This is something that you'd likely have to use in the beginning of a fight. And then lastly, Arcane Aura, or Brilliance Aura, sorry, has been removed. Which is actually kind of sad to see in a way, because that's very flavorful coming from Warcraft 3, where the horse mage guy, or an magein for that matter, would benefit your troops with your other heroes with Brilliance Hour, which would give you a passive mana regeneration. But I kind of understand why they went away with it, because they don't want just mages to be this mana buff. But at least this, all the entire Arcane tree, it seems on paper extremely interesting, and it seems like it's something funny to play with. It seems a lot like the Elemental Shaman's later iterations, TBC Elemental Shaman with Overload and all the extra stuff that can proc off of other stuff. And Arcane Power being this one here. When activated, your casting speed is increased by 35%, burning 2% mana, reducing mana gain by 75%, and falling below 10% mana cause you to die. It lasts 20 seconds and cannot be cancelled. So if you activate this, you're either gonna survive or you're gonna die. Maybe a Druid's Innovate plus the Arcane Meditation plus something else would help you survive if you're already low on mana. What is it then? It is 50% of your mana you're allowed to use, basically. And using more than 50% of your mana in terms of spells cast and arcane missiles and arcane rupture and so on, using more than that would cause you to die, unless you would get some extra help with the gaining mana. But then again, an innovate and other stuff would something like that would probably be wasted on you if you are using this buff. That's something emergency that you need to get in order to survive an encounter. All in all, there are some very, very impactful talents that you would probably want in the arcane tree going as an arcane mage before dipping into either frost or fire. And you would probably want to go pyroblast for PvP, because then you're the pyro mage, right? This is an interesting one, arcane power. This might not be worth it in PvP, but I can see how useful it is in PvE. But let's just try to make a build here real quick. Remember, I know nothing about mages, so take all of this with a giant pound of salt. Probably want avoidance on your... you want to avoid interruption on your channel of arcane missiles. And I think that arcane concentration is likely more impactful than magic absorption. So this clear casting is probably what you would go for. For PvE, you would of course want reduced threat. For now, we're mostly going for a PvP spec. You want Arcane Rupture and Arcane Impact. We're skipping Magic Attunement. I don't really think it's worth in PvP. I'm not really sure I understand what the difference is between this. Arcane Subtlety just seems like it does. So Arcane Impact, Arcane Rupture, those are a must, I think. And Arcane Focus, I don't really know what the difference is between Arcane Focus and Arcane Subtlety. It just seems like Arcane Subtlety is more resistance than Arcane Focus for the same point. So not knowing better, comment below in the comment section if you know better. But I go for this one to open up for the next row. And Temporal Convergence. Is this worth it? Has a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of Arcane Rupture and cause it to refund the mana cost of your next cast. This effect can only occur once every 15 seconds. I think I'll skip this. I'll skip it for now and see what else is there. I think Arcane Meditation, it seems really powerful. Maybe not so much in a duel, but in a battleground, not needing to sit down and drink so much is probably quite nice. But I don't know how impactful this actually is. But I know that improved counterspell is really, really, really strong. But also improved mana shield, I think. It seems like 25% is probably good, I think. But is it as good as Arcane Meditation? I don't know. I don't think so. So let's just move on and see where we go from here. Arcane Potency, we definitely want that one, for sure. Accelerated Arcana. I don't know how much, like how strong it is in terms of cooldown recovery. But 6%, if it's the same 6% that's applied to the rest of the talent, then it's not that much, I think. So I'll take Presence of Mind and Arcane Instability, I think. And I actually think the last point here is probably also worth it. That's a lot extra percentage chance for you to get 25% more damage. And then there's Resonance Cascade. And we probably get all 5 points of this one as well, leaving us with 32 points spent in the Arcane talent tree. Temporal Convergence, I really see the value in PvE. I'm not sure it's that valuable in PvP, because the chance is quite low. And there will be a natural limit as to how many opportunities you'll have to proc this. And since we are getting Arcane Presence, it probably makes sense to go into Fire and get Pyroblast, right? So do you get Impact, or do you get Improved Fireball? I think you get Impact, right? At least for PvP. And this Improved Fireblast and the range of your fire spells. And then you get Pyroblast. Maybe there's actually not much else to go for in the fire tree. So with this, I think that it probably just makes sense to fill in the rest in the Arcane tree, actually, because this doesn't seem like there's much worth going into either Frost or Fire for more than this. Not on a glance. I'm going on a limb here, guys. I am not that knowledgeable about the Mage, so just keep this in mind when you freak out in the comment section and telling me how I missed something. So let's go for Accelerate Arcana and Temporal Convergence, and improve Mana Shield. Why not? And then maybe get another point in Arcane Subtlety. I don't really realistically see mages wanting that much. Maybe it's a different story now that you can actually get mana back when wanting. But for now, let's just put the last point in Incinerate. And actually maybe get 2 points in Incinerate. And I think something like this would probably work just fine in PvP. But let's move on to Fire. Alright, Fire. Let's read the words. Fire is one of the top performing specializations in Raid. For this reason, we do not think it requires a lot of number tuning. Mechanically though, Ignite has a few issues that we aim to resolve, which we talk about in detail in Ignite's section. Additionally, Fire's rotation is dull, similarly to Frost, outside of upkeeping the Scorch debuff on the target, which we plan to remedy with the addition of Hot Streak. Interesting. Ignite now deals its damage over 6 seconds instead of 4 seconds. The threat generated by Ignite is now split amongst all mages that have contributed to the Ignite damage. And Ignite is this one. Critical strikes from fire damage spells cause the target to burn for an additional 40% of your spell's damage over 6 seconds instead of 4 seconds. So that's probably to make it easier to have uptime on this, I'm guessing. Developer comment: Ignite has issues with being a debuff that is contributed to by all fire mages in a group, but loading all the threat onto the initial applying mage. In addition to this, we've foreseen that fire mages might have difficulties with the uptime of Ignite due to Arcane being a much more desirable specialization, and in result reducing the amount of fire mages. For this reason, we've also increased the duration of Ignite, increasing the window of upkeep. We are aware that this reduces the DPS of the effect, but we believe that this is compensated by mages no longer requiring to stop their spells to avoid Ignite reaching critical threat values and possibly causing a wipe due to it. Yeah, so basically with the threat changes, they're spreading out the threat amongst all the mages in the raid, making it less likely for the boss to switch to one of the mages, and then basically wiping the raid. And since it's only a 2 seconds difference, hopefully it's not too much. I think they're right on this one. Small change would make it so that, especially at high levels of gear, that more mages would try to pump just as much as possible. Next one, improved Fire Blast. Now also reduces the cooldown, the global cooldown of your Fire Blast by half a second, meaning you can much faster go back to your rotation or go back into casting a fireball. And a new talent, Hot Streak. 5th row, 3 points, gives your Fireball and Fire Blast spell criticals a 100% chance to grant you the Hot Streak effect. The Hot Streak effect lowers the cast time of your Pyroblast by half a second per stack. Last 30 seconds stacks up to 9 times. And what is the cast speed on Pyroblast? Or cast time? It is 6 seconds. So with 9 stacks of Hot Streak, we are basically bringing it down to 1.5 second, right? Cast time on a Pyroblast. So that's enough to actually make it so valuable that you would want to have it as a core part of your rotation in PvE, which you probably wouldn't before because of the cast time. So just making a slight change to make fire just a little bit more interesting than just pressing the same button over and over. And then Blast Wave, which was here before, has just been moved over here to make room for Hot Streak. So Blast Wave is here now, which is very nice. And that's pretty much it for fire, it seems. Nothing else has really changed. Just making the PvE rotation a little bit more interesting. And I think I'm fine with that. I think fire is already quite strong and can be used in PvP as well. Just a massive amount of damage that it has. So we are moving on to Frost. And let's see what they say. Frost performs pretty well in most parts of the game, but has one apparent problem. The rotation is entirely composed of a single ability in most raid encounters, which is Frostbolt. We don't want to complicate rotations too much due to vanilla being much simpler than its expansion counterparts, but we felt like Frost was too simple even for vanilla standards. For this reason, we've added new functionality to Ice Barrier to reward its upkeep, a new rotational ability called Icicles, and the Flash Freeze talent that synergizes with Icicles and primarily activates against creatures due to its trigger condition. Okay. Moved Piercing Ice to the 2nd row, Developer comment, this change was done for a smoother talent progression in the second and third rows of the talent tree. So that's this one. Piercing Ice has just been moved up. It was down here before. So yeah, they've just swapped places with ice shards. The next one, improved Blizzard, slow amount reduced from 65% down to 40%. So that's a big nerf for our dear AoE mages. Now with the buffs to Paladin and the nerfs to mages, maybe we will see a shift in who is the king of AoE grinding. Probably still mages would be the best for pulling an entire instance and just AoEing it all down. But they will probably have a lot harder time, especially in the early levels when the AoE things start to come online. Which in general I'm fine with, mainly because I don't play mage myself. But I can see how this might be annoying for some people who love to just AoE farm. But that's it. That's the thing with Vanilla Plus, is there may be some power shifts, and philosophy around hybrid text and stuff like that might change. Anyway, moving on. Next one is Shatter. Critical strike chance bonus has been reduced from 50% to 35%. So that's this one. Increase the critical strike chance of all your spells against frozen targets by 35% instead of 50%. So that's still actually mostly punishing for players at lower gear levels. But I feel like this is even a bigger nerf, right? That's a big nerf for PvP, making Frost Mage a lot less bursty. We will have to see how this one plays out. New talent, Icicles. 5th row keystone. You draw upon frost ley lines becoming frozen in place, and you launch icicles at the enemy, causing 100 and run frost damage every second for 5 seconds. Damage taken has a high chance to shatter your icy prison, dealing 30% of your health, your base health, as frost damage to you. Canceling the effect early won't remove the root effect. Okay, so that's really punishing in PvP. They don't want this to be used as much in PvP, clearly. It has a flat mana cost, a 30-second cooldown, 5-second channel, and a 30-yard range. Every icicle has a 40% spell power scaling coefficient, and the last rank costs 400 mana and does 272 damage per icicle. Very interesting. Developer comment, we've opted to give this new part of the Frost Mage rotation a downside and the inability to slow your targets, as we want to avoid giving them more power to Frost Mages in player versus player scenarios, as they're already a strong contender in that field, while giving another tool to your rotation for player PvE, basically player versus enemy or environment scenarios where these downsides are much less likely to matter. The freeze effect functions like any other root effect and can be broken with blink and other effects. So you can actually get out of the root with blink, but the root does not disappear just by you stopping the channel. And I'm guessing also if you get stunned or something, that probably does also not break the root. So, and it also deals 30% damage to you as frost damage. If you take, there's a chance that if you take damage, you basically do a lot of damage to yourself. But apparently it's frost damage, so some of it can be probably mitigated. Is it with frost ward or frost warding or something that they can use on themselves to reduce the frost damage taken? But that's very interesting. That's very nice for them to have something for PvE, so that frost mages aren't the wrong spec to bring in PvE. Like basically from Anchorai and onwards, that's usually fire that is brought to raids. But now also you have Arcane and you have Frost, so you have many more options for PvE, which is great. And then there's a new talent, Flash Freeze. 6th row, 2 points. If your target is immune to freeze effects whenever one is applied, you have a 100% chance to gain Flash Freeze instead, finishing the cooldown of your icicle spell. Additionally, your next icicles has a 400% increased channel speed, lasts 10 seconds. Developer comment, this effect can trigger by your Frostbite talent and Frost Nova, the former allowing this effect to naturally trigger from your Frostbolt rotation. Okay, so again, something interesting with you spamming Frostbolt and then suddenly you're going to trigger this effect and you're going to get a really fast icicles cast. Basically, you can cast it in 1 second instead of channeling for 5 seconds. It's a 1 second channel. But I can see how this also could be used in PvP actually, because flag carriers on a high enough level of PvP are using a lot of they're fapping a lot, right? They're using a free action potion a lot, and that makes you immune to Frost Nova and other root effects. So in that case, the mage, the frost mage, can gain some great burst, which is actually quite interesting. I like the idea of mages being able to somewhat counter free action potions. So there's a little bit of a give and take there. I think this could also make PvP a little bit more interesting, so that maybe if there's a lot of frost mages on the enemy's team, maybe you would consider when or even if to use free action potions. So yeah, now it's not just shamans that can purge it off you and are a threat. Now mages also has some counter to it, and maybe there are other effects like a freedom for a paladin. Does that also make you immune? I think it does make you immune, so that's actually quite dangerous for a paladin to use his hand of freedom against the frost mage. And then the last one here, Ice Barrier, increase the frost damage by 15% while active. Developer comment this change allows Ice Barrier to be overall damage gain if it lasts for the majority of its duration, rewarding proper timing of its activation, such as being aware of area of effect damage while not majorly affecting player versus player scenarios due to it being much more likely to break. Well, I don't know if Ice Barrier is much more likely to break. You know, if a mage doesn't have his Ice Barrier up, he's very, very squishy, right? I think when fighting frost mages, I feel like they have at least a 50% uptime on their Ice Barrier. And 15% damage is not nothing. It's that is some damage. But maybe it falls in line with the nerf to Shatter. So some buffs, some nerfs. All in all, I think I like the changes to Frost. I think I like the most of the mage changes. I think they did a good job with mages. Nothing seems extremely overpowered, while also making it a lot more interesting for PvE. Already mages had a lot of good stuff going for them. Some of the strongest and best classes getting around in the world and leveling and being wanted in every raid because of the buffs and the utility that they bring with food and portals and stuff like that. Mage is always nice to have. And now the gameplay is even better for the mage's point of view. Now even I am considering leveling a mage because I feel like these are some very interesting, and it would be very funny to play around not only with Frost, but also with Arcane. And let's just take a look at the talents and where they're placed. So Icicles, it's right here. Draw upon frost ley lines becoming frozen in place and launch icicles at the enemies. For 5 seconds damage taken has a high chance to shatter you, dealing 30% damage or 30% of your base health as frost damage to you, and cancelling the effect will not remove the root effect. That one you have to blink out of. And then there's the flash freeze right below it for some extra maybe utility, not only in PvE but also actually usable in niche scenarios in PvP. And here we have at the bottom the Ice Barrier with frost damage increased, so there's a great value to not take so much damage and have an 100% uptime on this. And compared to the vanilla tree, I think I like the changes. It's not changing too much, but it's really adding a lot of interesting flavor at the bottom of the tree. Something very, very cool and useful and interesting to play around with. And yeah, overall, it's great to see. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play around with a completely new talent tree, which is the Arcane. That really sounds like it's going to be fun to play around with, and interesting to mix and match maybe different talent trees to see what you get and figure out what performs best in PvE and in PvP. There already was some very interesting choices to be made as a mage, but now there's even more interesting choices. Nothing seems too overpowered, at a glance at least. So that's very nice, good to see. Once I've done with my class series, I do want to make a PvP tier list, just speculating on which classes will perform best in PvP, mostly in a PvP 1v1 scenario. And I talked about this in other videos, that once I've done with all the classes, and I only need a Warlock, the Druid, and a Warrior. So just from the looks of it, I think something like Priest and Paladin are probably some of the top performers in PvP. But I'm dueling a lot right now, and I'm trying to keep an eye on other people dueling and seeing, just to get a feel of how the different classes perform and see who comes out on top the most. So I'm very interested in seeing the Druid as well. I think the Druid could also be extremely strong here on Turtle WoW. I think a skilled Druid, even in vanilla, can almost beat anyone, but it really requires there's really a high skill ceiling to the Druid. So I'm going to try and see if I can find a skilled Druid and watch him PvP on Turtle WoW to see how Druids, and get a feel of how Druids perform. But anyway, this was the Mage, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like the video. If you have any questions or suggestions, comment below. And if you like these long format videos and just in general like the content, please subscribe to the channel. And I will see you guys in the next video.
The turtles. Where are the turtles? Where are the turtles? Come on, guys, get out of here. Where are the turtles?